Today's guest is Kelly Roman. We had a truly fascinating conversation about his truly fascinating journey from graphic novel artist to neuroscience entrepreneur dealing with wearable devices to deal with depression and anxiety. So this presentation, and I was thinking while I was looking at your work, how somebody like your mind,
100%. We have a lot of our customers do that. And with transcendental meditation, and one of the doctors at Columbia that really gave us our start, Richard Brown, he's now, I know I'm not in touch with him as much as I used to be, but he works with like Ray Dalio, and I think a lot of the folks that have helped to push that forward with first responders and police and firemen. So yeah, that's a natural fit. If you use it, you can use our device for like 20 minutes in the morning and evening. That's the protocol. So
it's very
fit.
Similar. Yeah, it's interesting. I think my practice is a half hour, but I think traditionally it's a 20-minute, right, out of at least TM, I think. Is there anything you practice on your own to stay?
Yeah, I don't,
grounded?
honestly, I don't meditate, but like I've experimented with it. Kind of like the looking at like a wall and just kind of trying to clear my mind. But I find running is like my meditation. I run about 15, 20 miles a week. And I have a personal trainer, which is I don't look at it as a luxury. It's like mental health treatment. And so I think, I get it with being with my kid too, like kind of when I sit down and focus and like play Lego, like that's a clearing of the mind in a way. I just get back to, so
sometimes that can be tough. Like I know if I'm coming from the day of work and then to switch gears to that, I think you have to be really mindful and intentional to be there.
I have ADHD. I'd say high moderate. It's probably maybe why the meditation straight up is a little bit more difficult, maybe, but it would probably be more helpful to me too. But I'm getting there. I'm on a journey too. So yeah.
Well, it's funny you say ADHD because your background is so varied. You've sort of tackled so many areas and seem to have done successfully. So I'm curious.
Hyperfocus.
Is that what it is? That
I think it's part of it is that. Yeah, hyperfocus.
It's to like overcompensate.
I think it's. I mean, it's probably a way of, you can look at it that way. I think it's just one of the upsides of ADD or ADHD is that you can have, I think if you don't have it or not aware of it, you think someone can't focus, but it's actually, there's quite a bit of time where you can focus this incredibly intensely on something.
I didn't realize that that's an aspect of having.
Yes, it's the
which is not a
upside.
bad thing.
No, it's not. It's one of the superpowers of it, so to speak.
That's
interesting. So yeah, I think that's probably helped. I mean, I think, there's probably a lot of entrepreneurs out there that have that also have some form of bipolar, and the positive aspect of hypomania is that you can really, focus and get a lot done sometimes. So I think I read an article that it's like 10x prevalence of bipolar in CEOs.
Oh, really?
They did a survey, I mean, it wasn't like published in New England Journal of Medicine. It seemed pretty legit though. It's like, and from my experience, you see it, you see spectrum, you see in very successful people, there's going to be, ways that they've harnessed their superpowers. And then other challenges that you don't see,
Yeah. I was just talking to Aaron, actually. It was here the other day, which was great. And we were talking about entrepreneurs, and there's this particular breed, right? There's got to be, in a way, there's got to be a disconnect between this thing that rises, this impulse to do something, and then the fact that in a way, the world hasn't done it yet, or there's no path. There's got to be a disconnect between the ability to pull that off.
Yeah.
It's almost like the guy who is that? The guy who climbed, the free climbing guy.
Honnold. Yeah.
He's got
Alex Honnold. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is it? He's got like no fear. There's like a thing in his
brain.
So
they looked at his amygdala, and it was like basically there's like no activity. And we can actually. That's not a bad segue. Like the wearable that we've developed, it targets the amygdala and creates a pretty significant electrical field there to try and calm down hyperactivity. But in his case, when they did MRI, there's like no activity.
That's
It's
crazy.
very, yeah. I mean,
But he's harnessing it. I mean,
he's
like you
harnessing it, and the
said,
downside is, I think he kind of alludes to in that movie, is like he can also there can be a downside in terms of like emotional
yeah,
numbness and
yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
stuff that
yeah.
shows up. But
I was
yeah,
just
he's definitely harnessed it.
yeah, yeah. So I definitely want to get to the meat of the work you're doing, but you have such
Yeah.
interesting, varied background. So let's just go back a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so you grew up upstate. You ended up moving up upstate early on,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
you said you grew up in sort of a rural from Manhattan originally, but then
Yes.
moved up upstate.
Yes. Yep.
Were you brothers and sisters, or
I have a half brother
yeah,
from my dad's first marriage. He's 12 years older, so that was a good support.
yeah,
He went to Harvard. I ended up going to Harvard,
yeah,
and I really looked up to him. And he was, kind of a bit of a geeky rebel
yeah?
in high school. So yeah, it
Okay.
was nice to have him. I didn't live with him, but he was around.
And were you always driven from a young age up there? I mean, it was you sort of had a clear path. Not so much what you wanted to do, but you recognize an energy to get stuff done.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, my dad, was an entrepreneur. He came from very humble. I think if he had had a more affluent upbringing, he would have been like a huge Wall Street guy. But
Okay.
he did quite a bit with what he had. But he had that that drive, and I think the thing, and he was also, as we discussed, he was in the military. He was like a drill sergeant, so
Yeah.
he a lot of discipline. And he
Right.
taught me, like, if you're gonna do something, like I remember even just sweeping the porch upstate, like, if there is a leaf missing, you know, he would tell me, not in a mean way, but just like, do the job completely.
Yeah.
Like, don't half-ass it.
Yeah.
And so that's always stuck with me.
Yeah. It's
And
great.
I try to give my daughter. It's hard in New York. It's easier, I think, in the country where there's like, it's easier to kind of have chores.
Yeah.
Over here, everything's delivered. Taking the trash out is putting stuff in the dishwasher. It kind of ends there. It lets
Yeah.
you get a little
Right.
creative. So, but with my dad, we were like building a shed together, mowing the lawn, like that kind of
That's
stuff.
great.
So,
That's great. It's funny. I was talking to my wife about. I was raised in the city, so there's a certain education, street smarts
mhm.
you get. There's like life lessons just
Yeah,
built into
I
living in
can
the
tell you
city.
have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my kids were in the city, and then we moved out during COVID, not really thinking about it, but the cafe shut down. We moved out. We had a place out in the island.
Mhm.
And they were like, let's go for it. We
Yeah.
liked it out there, and I love it. But I was
Awesome.
talking to you the other day, he plays a lot of sports, right? So you got to get tough. You got to grow up in sports,
Yeah.
and you got to find that balance. But it's a harder to teach him that lesson because he's not seeing it every day. It's a very good, easy lifestyle,
Yeah.
But to what you said, in the sense of, I have a yard,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this weekend we actually are building a shed, which I'm really looking
Yeah.
forward to.
Yeah. You are literally?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's awesome.
So it's like, so it's
Yeah.
interesting. There's certain things, like you're right up there, and I feel like outside the city, there's certain things you miss, but there's also the ability, I think, to, for lack of a better word, do more frontier like
Yes.
stuff.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally. Chopping wood. That
exactly.
was another thing. Yeah. I think, there's other opportunities here in the city. I mean, uh, uh, my wife was very, she's very good in bringing food to all the free fridges in Brooklyn. I don't know if you've heard this.
No.
There's a system of, this kind of got bigger during COVID, of just refrigerators that are parked on the sidewalk. Whatever business owners there has to agree to it, and they basically supply the power and the little bit of real estate. In the community, you just put whatever food you have in there, and then there's like a dry goods shelf next to it, and there's over 100 of these now in Brooklyn.
Wow.
Um, so my wife got really into that, and brought Bija along with her on the food runs and stuff like that. So I think there's opportunities like that that don't exist as easily in the country, right?
Right.
Where
Absolutely.
you're so, I mean, I love the concept of what you're doing here. I mean, it seems like, from what I've read, I'm still learning, but the idea of building
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
So I think that's, New York's a great opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I like about what's happening here, and coffee and cafes naturally lend itself to it, but something magical has happened on this stoop and on this block, where you really have people from all over, old and young, all sorts of industries, from banker to skateboarders, who
Yeah.
come together and
Yep.
just seem to get along,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is cool, you know?
Yeah, I was just saying, like, please still ride the subway. Like the subway,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
it's more dangerous. Yes, there's problems, but like it's one of the great. It's part of the wealth of the
I
city,
agree.
actually.
I agree. I get
So
upset when I hear people say they stop running. I'm like, I don't know.
it, you it's
You gotta
yeah,
stay connected.
yeah, it's 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you end up in Harvard for literature, right?
yep,
You went
yep.
and I want to talk about, but where did that impulse come from? Where was that?
I don't know if it was maybe part of where I heard McGinnis talking about narcissism, kind of the healthy. It's probably a little bit of that.
Okay.
I think you know, finding myself through the art of creating
Yeah.
art that's an expression of yourself is very powerful. So uh, and wanting your ideas to, I think any entrepreneur wants to make their ideas a reality,
Yeah.
and there's something uh, kind of very beautiful about like the movie or the TV industry in that way, where you're literally creating
Right.
a
So
reality.
you had a vision of you want to
Uh,
go into sort of screenwriting or something
Screen,
like
I ended up
okay.
focusing on
Yeah.
graphic novels.
Right.
I wrote a graphic novel for HarperCollins that was a 5-year project.
This is the art of war?
Yeah, The Art
Yeah,
of
yeah.
War. Really love doing that. It's the only one I've done so far, but I like really dove into it
And how'd you
for
get connected
years.
to Sun Tzu?
I had read it a little off and on. I think my dad introduced me to it. I found it very difficult to kind of, you can't really read it like a book. And when you're reading it, you can tell like there's some powerful stuff there, but you don't have a lot of context. You have to create the context in your head. And I think so. I wanted to have a graphic novel that used almost all of the text, but like provided the narrative context so that you could see it kind of
Yeah.
actually unfold. Um, and the way that the actual text is written, it's basically from the perspective of someone who's writing down what Sun Tzu's saying. So there's lots of Sun Tzu said this, Sun
Yeah,
Tzu
yeah.
said that. So I kind of took that and turned it into a journal of uh, this this banker who worked for Sun Tzu in the near future, and Sun Tzu is the head of the Chinese sovereign wealth fund, basically, kind of the investment arm of the Chinese government. And in my story, the financial industry was militarized, and so you're using all of the digital scary AI, the robots, all of that to kind of conduct your financial plan, and so acquiring a startup there's a literal war aspect to it. So it just felt like a natural fit, and I think it feels still when I look at it, it was my first one. I think it's a little immature in some ways,
Okay.
but there are some great moments in it that I'm very
Yeah,
proud of.
yeah.
So um, yeah, I think if you want to read Art of War, it's
It's an
an
approachable way
interesting
to
way to
do it.
do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah, yeah.
definitely I remember reading Art of War ages ago, but, I'll check out, that
Awesome.
approach.
Yeah, awesome.
So, just to stay on it for a
Yeah,
second,
yeah.
I mean, what resonated with you? What's the what's the takeaway, I guess?
Yeah, it well, so I get asked a lot, like,
Yeah.
what's your favorite line? Or I think it changes depending on where I am in my business, but like this idea that you have to you the leader has to create the threshold for bravery. You have to be the example for bravery, and everyone else uh, will have to strive to reach that example that you've made. So basically, it's almost like a biblical idea. Like don't ask someone to do something you wouldn't do yourself.
Yeah.
And the best way to show people how hard you want to work is you work that hard yourself, and you kind of lead by example. And that, that you see that being practiced a lot. If you see the boss kind of sleeping on the factory room floor, that's a signal.
Right.
And I think it's positive. Yeah, I think that's the thing that I think about the
Lead
most.
by example.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and be live your braveness and your bravery, and that will be contagious.
yeah.
So
It's funny, there's these things come in cycles. Like right now, stoicism is really big, right? They sort of get trendy, which is great because they're amazing words of wisdom. Um, but it's so funny when you see people sort of stumble on these things, or let me say this, when they try to express it in a modern way, as if they've come up with the idea, but these things have been spoken
yeah,
about for
yep,
ages.
yep.
And it's nice when the real source, I think, comes to the
Yep,
forefront.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep. Yeah, and I think, and if you like, I was a big fan of kind of old Tales of the Crypt type illustrations,
Right.
and kind of like the old, even the old Disney, like the darker,
Yeah.
kind of Snow White, and there's some really amazing dark
Well, like the
illustrations.
Grimm's fairy tales also,
Yeah,
right?
yep,
We're
yep,
all
100%,
dark. Yeah,
100%,
yeah.
100%. So that was also like a way to
That's cool. Yeah.
get that in
I
there.
like
Yeah.
that. So you wrote that and again. The vision was, and then you went from that, ended up in marketing, right? From
Yeah.
after
So
Harvard.
yeah. So when I took the advance, I gave it basically to the illustrator
Okay.
so that he could, I drew the storyboards. I wrote it, drew the storyboards. It was a long
Yeah.
process.
You said
Uh,
5 years. That was
yeah, yeah.
wow.
It's a 5. Yeah, you don't
And you
do it for
started
the
that
money.
in school. You started after.
Oh, I quit my job. I was in marketing. I want to say this is 2006. So I was working for a startup here in the city called Oddcast. I don't think it's around anymore, but it was one of the early like the kind of avatars for customer service, kind of a
Okay.
SaaS
Yeah.
company. Union Square Ventures was a
Oh yeah.
backer, so I
Yes.
got some good exposure to Fred Wilson and kind of learned that world a little bit. So um, I had an opportunity, and then I went to Nielsen, like the Nielsen
The
ratings,
ratings. Yeah.
and I was doing well in that job, and got an offer to join Bebo, which was acquired by AOL later. You may
I
remember
remember
it.
the. I
Social
know. Yeah.
media,
Yeah.
early,
Early.
so they
Yeah.
had 30 million users at the time, and I was going to be like 13th employee, run their music division. Like I already got the apartment. Everything was set, and literally the night before I went out there, uh, my to be wife, to be completely honest, gave me a little bit of psychedelics. It was the first time I'd ever taken
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I don't use, like, I rarely drink. I don't,
Right.
but that was actually really transformational. And I just realized that evening, and I was up almost all night, that I really wanted to do this book. And
Yeah.
she's just like, we'll figure it out, just go for it. I waited till I was completely clear of mind the next day, and then I told who was going to be my boss that I'm turning this job down
Wow.
to write a
Wow.
graphic novel, and he was like, "You're crazy."
Wow.
And I was like, I'll make the money some other way.
Yeah.
Like I'm still,
How old are you
I'll
at that
figure."
point?
Uh,
Me.
maybe 30. 30. Let me think. I was born in 74, so 32, I
Okay.
guess. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I wasn't a kid,
Yeah.
but I had enough confidence in myself. I think Bebo was ended up being acquired by AOL for a lot of money. I would have made not like FU money, but like
Right.
I would have
Would've been. Yeah.
I would have
Yeah.
made some money, but I don't regret it at all. I think it, it was an amazing experience. I
Yeah.
got the book out, it was reviewed, and I think it informs what I do today quite a bit. I think it's
Yeah.
more subconsciously, like I think from reading it 200 times or something. It's just I think it's on a subconscious level
Yeah.
at this point.
Absolutely.
So,
That is a crazy and phenomenal story. I mean, that's awesome.
yeah.
I I imagine, everybody always talks about, and they usually give a lip service, money isn't everything, and the pursuit of that is everything. And you got to make a living,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
to actually have really said no to it, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
pursued this thing that I think that's pretty rare to have, and especially in something that's sort of a creative project.
Well, it's
And,
rare, I think, to get to the point where you can actually make that decision and actually still be a person that could do something else. Because
yeah,
you
yeah,
and so it was, I was, it was relieving to not have to have both lives at the same
yeah,
time.
right.
And I think I
Not
was
to have to
also,
fight for it. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
because I
yeah,
was doing the writing and stuff outside of work. So I was doing like my best at work and then doing,
yeah,
and that's exhausting.
yeah,
So I was like, I gotta do this. And then, after, actually when I met I got most of the work done the first 3 years, and there's like 2 years editing. So
yeah,
2009, I met my co-founder. At that point, I'd already handed the script and the storyboards over to the illustrator, and there was about 2 years of art making, which I would go and check on him, but it was like I wasn't the one like running the all doing all the work at that point.
yeah,
So I started working with my co-founder, Fisher Wallace, Chip Fisher, and I had, struggled with depression in really since college,
Okay.
and didn't like the side effects that I got. I mean, and I'm not like
So about for
anti-drugs,
medication.
yeah, for
Yeah,
medication.
yeah.
I'm not
Right.
anti-pharmaceuticals, but like they're they're they don't work well with everyone, and
If you to the extent that you can avoid them, why not? I'm not saying don't avoid, but to the
yeah.
extent that you can find a path without them, sure.
And when I run into someone who's having success with them, I'm like
Yeah,
you're lucky and it's great.
yeah.
Like that's awesome. So, but so I started. He had gotten this technology from the inventors who had died, and I started using it, and I it worked for me pretty much immediately.
Okay.
I haven't had to take uh, any antidepressants since then. But
So
I
take
just
me through. So take me
yeah.
through. So you meet him. You didn't know him. I mean,
I didn't. He went to Harvard, was
okay.
18 years older than me, and so after I was done with the book, I did need to make some money.
Yeah.
So I reached out through the Harvard network. That was like, when they say, Harvard has maybe some people cynically will say you go there for the
The
network.
connections. Yeah.
It really did
Yeah.
help
I'm
me in
sure.
that
Yeah.
case. So yeah, I ran into him through that, and
And this
uh,
topic came up. Like, how did it get into
so
the
I
technology and the
well,
depression?
yeah. So basically, he had just acquired the IP, and his first co-founder had died of cancer. So in a way, there's like really five co-founders, the inventors, they had died. His original co-founder died. It's just
Wow.
Chip. And I just loved the opportunity.
Yeah.
I knew we'd have a long path ahead of us to do the research, to validate it. There was some a little bit of evidence at the time. It worked for me, but the idea that you could use electricity to harness an electrical system was just very of your brain was just very powerful idea to me, and I was like, this is one of those few things that if we can really prove this works and we get the form factor right and everything, this could be something that's, not to use the cliche in Silicon Valley, but could really change the
Yeah.
world, right?
Yeah.
So, um, and I haven't really lost that belief in it since then. I mean, I've been through many clinical trials now, uh, and fortunately, they have validated the personal experience I had with it and
It's
so
amazing.
forth. So
But you have no science back. You didn't have a science background up
no,
until that point.
no, no. I'm totally generalist.
Yeah.
My brother is a professor at medical school here downstate.
Okay. He's in biology? He's a
Yes,
biologist?
cell
Yeah.
biology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's pretty reputable, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
What's
has.
his
Yes.
what's
So,
his history and where's the reputation come from?
yeah. So I mean, he was like a superstar grad student. Worked for David Baltimore, who's Nobel Prize winner. Um, at various institutions, and then ended up at SUNY Downstate, where he's now tenured and was like he's like an associate dean. He goes in and out of a few job titles, but so he teaches medical students immunology, cell biology. He's published in a number of journals, and so I was reading his articles
Yeah.
as I was in college, and as soon as I could start really comprehending
Right.
them. And
And you could understand them and you sort of
Yeah,
you
well, I
picked
talked
up
to
a
him
little
about
bit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, I mean, I think, and I really understood like the researcher's ethos, which is entrepreneurial in its own
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
I think, um, but, so that was kind of my, you know, you know, informal education at the beginning. And then, there's a lot to the medical device business that is not the research
Yeah.
part.
Right.
Yeah. And so you have to
The regulations and the
regulation, the manufacturing
right.
is a big one. There's the market industrial design. So I think I was able to harness some of my artistic, uh, you know, abilities, talents, or just interests
Yeah.
uh, into the user experience, the design, the marketing side. But I wanted to make a beautiful object
Yep. Yep.
that also has a lot of utility. And so I think, and there's a storytelling aspect to any venture. So I think that was, I was able to harness that. And I've now sponsored, like as a company, 5 clinical trials. I've really understand how those work
Nice.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could talk pretty intelligently about the like what's going on in the brain, and
Yeah.
nowhere near as much as some people that I work with. So but, I've met a few other founders in this niche wearable brain stimulation space, and most of them come out of academia, which makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, and so I bring a different skill set to the table with it. But yeah, I think we're now, over the past year, we've kind of hit a different level now where the head of psychiatry at Mass General is an advisor. The former U.S. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, David Shulkin, is an
Yeah,
advisor.
wow.
We have the research that we need
Yeah.
now. We have beautiful industrial design from Eric Fields, who did Beats and Nest, and engineering team behind that, behind Beats. And so we have this great product, and we're just, we're definitely within a year of the FDA, hopefully, 7 months away
That's amazing.
from getting it.
So let's talk a little bit about the science behind it and
Yeah.
what it's helping with.
Yeah.
Um, the area is called what's sort of the general science?
So neuromodulation is,
Neuromodulation. Okay.
I think, is a pretty common way to look at it.
Okay.
Um,
And there's a lot of research going into this field in general. There's other players in this
yeah,
world.
I mean, not as much as as there could be, but the NIH has funded research into brain stimulation, both the wearable kind that, like, I build, and the in-clinic kind that uses kind of larger, powerful magnets
Okay.
that a doctor will kind of position
Oh, right. I
over
saw
their
there
head.
was another one that used magnets,
Yeah,
but that was
TMS. Yeah,
sort of less portable, bigger,
it's
not
not
really end
portable.
user,
Yeah,
right? It's more clinical.
correct,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but it has the advantages. So the in-clinic form of brain stimulation has the advantages of being able to use MRI, being able to target, you know, very specific structures in the brain. But it's you have to get the MRI, you
Yeah.
have to go to the clinic. And in terms of response rate, we're actually seeing with our wearable form, at least as good, if not better than a lot of the in-clinic forms. So,
Okay.
um,
So neuromodulation is about, just take me through the
yeah,
definition.
sure.
Well, just take me through what does it
Yeah.
mean?
So
So,
I think you think of it as, creating an electrical field in the brain to modulate the activity of neurons,
okay.
basically. So, I think the easiest way to think about it is, like, if you're depressed or you have anxiety, your brain is not in homeostasis. You'll have certain regions that are hyperactive that should be less active, and you have other regions that are underactive or hypoactive that need to have higher activity. So then the problem that you try to solve with brain stimulation is, A, how do you reach those specific regions, and how do you kind of dampen activity where it's hyperactive, and how do you increase activity where it's hypoactive? Um, and so you do that through a couple of means. One is, using a waveform that can try and entrain how neurons are firing. And I guess you can think of it as like the electricity is kind of conducting their activity. And a lot of brain stimulation uses a sine wave, the curvy wave, and that's kind of the natural movement, if you can think of it, of neurons all firing together. Um, and so we actually are more contrarian. We use a square wave, so we're kind of more of an abrupt, uh, um, more of actually, in terms of waveform, what you would get from electroconvulsive therapy, which is the one that, in the movies where, you go under anesthesia,
Oh,
you
okay.
bite down on something. That has, that's not how ECT is anymore. You can use our device while drinking a cup of coffee, but some of the waveform
Yeah.
similarities are there. Not the electrical dose, but the square waveform is one of the things that we've kind of innovated
Interesting.
for.
Would the end user know that at all, or that's just behind the
No,
scenes?
that's behind the scenes. The end
Yeah.
user is going to know if their symptoms go away,
Right.
right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so that's and
Is there a physical sensation when you're wearing this thing?
in terms of, like, how does it feel on the skin? Some people feel like a little bit of warmth or
Right.
prickliness, not very
Yeah.
much. Uh,
Akin to, like, I'm thinking, you got to get an EKG. They put those little things on you, and there's like
Not that
not
much.
even that.
No, no,
Interesting.
not
Okay.
that much. And I'd say about, even possibly a majority of people wearing it uh, can't differentiate it from zero stimulation. And we know
Wow.
this because in a clinical trial that we published last year, we actually, one of the parts of the clinical trial is you interview the people on sham, which is the placebo, where
Yeah.
there's no stimulation coming out,
Right.
and you interview the people who actually have the active one, and you say, on a scale of 1 to 5, are you, confident that you have the active one? Do you think you definitely have the sham one? And more people on sham thought they had active
Really?
than people on active.
I was about to
So,
ask, like,
yeah,
the
yeah.
placebo people just psych themselves out.
Well, yeah.
And
I
you got
mean,
to weed them out,
that
right?
actually probably hurt us a little bit,
Right.
because there is a placebo effect if you think you're being treated.
Yeah, yeah.
So we had to work even harder on the active side, which we did. We did very well, especially with women. But I think another takeaway is
Yeah.
it's basically as comfortable as zero stimulation.
Right.
But
Interesting.
in order to make contact with the scalp, you have to have a little bit of pressure. Clamping force is what they call it.
Okay.
Um, and so just that alone is going to create some sensation at the electrode sites. It's not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, to answer your question, it's ours. Another innovation of ours is we figured out a way with the waveform. Not only is it square, but we use a very high carrier frequency, which basically allows the electricity to pass through the skull very easily. It bypasses the resistance. And what that basically means is you don't need as much electricity to get through the skull.
Wow.
And therefore the stimulation is more comfortable.
So the waveform and the frequency
Yep.
are being adjusted, so it can actually get through the
Yes.
physical material.
Yes. So you have,
And that's
yes,
is that a
exactly.
what is that? Is that a that resistance that fall under chemistry? Is that like what is this?
Physics.
That's a physics
Yeah,
thing. Okay.
that's
Yeah.
physics. So
Okay.
you have, which is quite a bit of burden on the stimulation you're creating, right? You have to get through the skull, which, with a low enough electricity where it's not uncomfortable.
Right.
And then you have to reach these, subcortical or these more interior brain regions like the amygdala, and the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex and these other, you have to get there. And then you have to be able to either dampen activity or increase activity.
Right.
So that latter part goes on these two other frequencies that are embedded in the carrier frequency.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
we have one that will help regions get more active if they're underactive, and another frequency that does the opposite. And luckily, the brain helps us a lot. I mean, there's kind of the brain has, the way to put it is it's programmed to have limits to activity, and wants to have an interconnectedness between regions in a healthy way.
It
And
wants to be balanced.
yes,
Actually,
and
yeah.
so this is more about helping it get there.
And is that so? The protocol is that does that automatically happen? Adjust the places that need to be active and reduce them, or does somebody have to?
No, right now it looks like that what we're doing
Yeah.
with this carrier frequency that gets through the skull and these two other frequencies, that we're actually able with the same stimulation to increase activity where it's needed or decrease activity where it's needed. And it is kind of state dependent. So that's how there's a state dependency, meaning that we're not going to, if something's hyperactive, it's not going to get even more hyperactive. And that's part of what the brain is helpful working with us
Yeah.
for these results. Now, we still have a ways to go to show kind of on a neuron level what's going on, but we have so far done clinical trials that shows the symptoms go away very quickly and they stay,
Okay.
either completely gone or very reduced. And then we have what's called an electrical field model that came out of Harvard in the last 3 months that shows the strength of our electrical field in different regions of the brain. So we know, for instance, in the amygdala, we have 0.4 volts per meter electrical field strength there. In order to have enough to actually change how that structure functions, you need to have 0.2. So we have twice as much as we need
Okay.
to modulate activity. But you're not even, to get, for instance, a seizure, you have to have like 80 volts per meter. So we're way below
Right.
the seizure
Interesting.
threshold. Whereas with electroconvulsive therapy,
They try to
they're
reduce
going
it,
up
right?
there.
Yeah.
Well, they want a seizure.
Yeah, exactly.
The seizure is, that's what they're actually,
Yeah.
they want to cause everything to fire.
Right. Wow.
So we're well below seizure threshold. you're not going to get a seizure from using it, but we're above the level that you need to actually have a change. So we know in these different regions that we have a strong enough electrical field, um, and we have the symptom reduction on the other side. So that middle piece, which is okay, looking at what is on a neuron and level, and you have to do things like with mice and actually
Okay.
stimulate brain cells and look. And so we're not quite there yet,
Yeah.
but we don't need to be there in order to go to market, as long as you have really some uh, you know credible context of is your brain stimulation able to interact with the brain.
Right.
We've done that.
Right.
We don't have a field model that says it's not getting through the skull.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have clinical trials that show against a sham that you're
That there's a
reducing
difference.
symptoms.
Yeah.
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 So that is plenty to go to market.
Wow.
But yes, we need to have more data on what's going on the neuron level, and that will help us with product development down the road. So that's like an ongoing
So my
thing.
question was going to be, when you're, and maybe this is what you're addressing,
Yeah.
when you get anxious, the question is what actually happens in the brain, and that's what still needs to be explored more. We know
Well,
something happens.
we know in most patients, the amygdala is hyperactive.
Okay.
So the fact that we're in the amygdala, we know it. We've modeled the Harvard is.
And what
shown
does that
we're-
part of the brain regulate normally?
You could think of it as like your fear. I mean, like,
Okay.
so the reason
Fight or flight response kind
yeah,
of thing?
yes.
Okay.
So the reason, typically someone's amygdala would be pretty hyperactive if you're leaning against a cliff, right?
Okay.
Or very active.
Yeah.
It's not in his case. The subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, which I mentioned before, there's a lot of evidence to show that's underactive in depressed patients.
Okay.
So if you have, say, anxiety and depression, you may need to or decrease activity in the amygdala and increase activity in the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex.
Let me ask about depression for a second.
Yeah.
Just this is something. Is that? And I'm sorry, this is an ignorant question. I don't
No,
know, so I'm
please,
really
please, yeah.
curious. Is that a genetic thing? Is that a chemical? That where does that come from? I don't know enough about it, because obviously, if you can adjust it, it's not DNA-ish, right? It's a chemical imbalance that somebody has, or how do you?
I wouldn't say that there's. I think there's a lot of factors that contribute. I think you may have genetic disposition. They've certainly shown that there is with bipolar, there is a genetic component to that. But it's not. I mean, your brain is by definition has plasticity. It's able to change
Right.
connections between regions. It's highly influenced by your environment. And so regardless of your now, does that mean that neuromodulation at some point alone could completely cure bipolar? Probably not, but I think you can with neuromodulation really control some of these symptoms.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So in terms of quality of life, a huge impact. And yeah, I mean, environment, has a huge impact. I mean, we work with a lot of veterans, like, you see that, you see the impact of the environment.
Sure.
Yeah.
So is the plan behind this that, so there's a clinical side where somebody may be getting sort of full-on treatment for something. Maybe it's a combination of medication, a combination of this therapy, whatever.
Yep.
This is a part of that.
Yep.
But then there's also sort of the end user side where I might say, is it the kind of thing where I'd say, I experience anxiety sometimes and I don't want to, or my life is really defined by it? Who's it for? What's the vision behind it?
So I think the ultimate, I'd say 5 years from now,
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a very strong scientific case for people to be using this preventatively.
Right. That's what I see.
And we have a lot of patients of our customers of our version 1 device, which I can get into, but we were able to commercialize a proof of concept device under a temporary FDA clearance that doesn't exist anymore. But that was a gift because we were able to actually get a lot of real world evidence. We have a lot of professional athletes using it. There's an esports team, I can't say the name, that's having a lot of successful.
And how are they? That's interesting, because someone else wants to ask you about.
Yeah.
How are they how are the sports people using it?
So improve autonomic function. You can think of it as like, especially in esports, you're playing video game 12, 14 hours a day, you're going to have nervous system burnout.
Yeah.
So they're able to track that burnout with heart rate variability and DC potential monitoring. And so these players are actually getting tracked. And when they can see their nervous system weakening, they have them use the device, and then they can actually see their autonomic function
Wow.
improving. And so that's a whole, side to it.
I would say
Yeah.
just don't play video games for 12 hours a day, but they're making huge
Yeah,
money
right.
doing it.
Exactly.
So,
And they love it.
and
I
they
mean,
love
yeah,
it.
yeah. So I think,
But
exactly. So
it's interesting.
yeah.
Okay. How about
So there's a
yeah.
whole performance
Yes.
aspect. So
Okay.
but I think from a business standpoint, to go to market,
Yeah.
it's the FDA requires a prescription.
To use this.
Yes, yes. The FDA,
Oh,
only
interesting.
country in the world that requires one, actually, but the FDA requires it. I actually kind of like that. I think it adds some
So
credibility.
even when it becomes the end user, I would have to get a
Well,
prescription.
in 5 years, I think we're going to be lobbying for. I think once the FDA sees more and more data
Yeah.
on the wearables, they'll get more and more comfortable going with it,
Okay.
having an OTC variant
Interesting.
of it.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but we have to give them the data for
Yeah.
that. So right now, we're focused on just giving them the data for anxiety, depression, insomnia. And if you have a technology that improves brain function in those all these center brain regions, you can impact a lot of
Yeah.
things.
Absolutely.
So it's really about for us choosing certain markets that are big and that there's huge problems, and anxiety, depression, insomnia are the three. So
Does it have to be adjusted based on the area? So you're dealing with insomnia or depression. I just want to use it to keep my brain balanced and
yeah,
well-being, whatever that means.
yeah.
Is it the same theory and technology, or if
It
you're
is.
working
It
with
is. And we're pretty like contrarian in that sense too.
okay,
There's an enormous amount of resources and energy going into really individualizing brain stimulation. Uh, so having a feedback loop of EEG and sometimes FNIRS, which is like infrared sensors, there's a lot of potential benefit to that. It is a lot more burdensome. You don't necessarily want to have a dozen electrodes or 64 electrodes.
right.
In the case of some of these effective closed loop systems, literally have 64 electrodes all
Wow.
over the
Okay.
head. So we look at it as we're not saying there's not value in creating this feedback loop and having this individualized treatment, but there's this huge opportunity to have something that's mass market that works
Yeah.
for most people.
Yeah.
It's very simple. Uh, just a couple of electrodes either side of the head and lightweight, and you don't have the burden of all that brain monitoring and imaging. Doesn't mean it's bad to do that.
Right.
It's just
It's just a
we're trying
different
to
approach.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
doing that simple approach,
Yeah.
and we're going to let other companies have a more, individual like TMS with the MRIs. It will eventually get there.
Yeah.
I think that I think as sensor technology gets better, quantum sensors, I think we can have a less burdensome headset that's inexpensive to build. But right now, what we've built is going to be, definitely the easiest, less expensive, and most safe and most effective thing you can use on a mass market level. So
Before this piece of technology, if you were talking about neuromodulation, we were talking a little bit about meditation, right? They've
yeah,
done studies that meditation affects the brain, right?
yeah,
The
yeah.
medication, right? Is so. Am I understanding it correctly that okay? All the idea of modulating the brain is not really a new
Oh no,
idea.
not at all. Yeah,
The advancement and the breakthrough is that um, without medication, and maybe you don't want to meditate or whatever, or it's
yeah,
different. It's really a different thing, but that you can now have access to that
yes, yeah,
really without the chemistry in a sense.
yes,
Yeah, which
yeah.
is pretty amazing.
And I think yes, and the technology, like the ability to deliver electricity through electrodes, has also been around for a long time.
Right, right.
But it's been fairly recent where you can really validate that with things like MRI and these really complex computer models that Harvard uses to do the modeling of in the brain of our stimulation. So I think the tools to validate it have gotten also
Yeah,
to the point where people can have confidence in these technologies like they
that's interesting.
couldn't before.
Now, this is a strange question, but is there a way to do this without FDA approval, or it needs the FDA because it's now become a medical
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. So we've
So I feel like there's stuff out there that says not
yeah,
FDA approved and
yeah.
people use it. I don't know.
No, no. We were pretty early in this in 2009 when we started, and we've been part of the whole regulatory transformation. Um, in 2011, the FDA actually wanted to require like drug level approval process for our technology for depression, anxiety, and insomnia uh, over a 8-year period of going back and forth with FDA, and it was really us.
Mhm.
We got them to only require that for depression, kind of this what's called class 3, the highest level,
Okay.
and then have what's called class 2 for anxiety and insomnia, which still requires clinical data, but not at the same scale. You can have a 4-week study instead of a 12-week study. You can have you don't have to have a sham control arm in the anxiety and insomnia, but you do with depression. And that was so we have succeeded in making it a little bit more accessible than it could have been if we weren't there in 2011. But yeah, I think when you're putting electricity on the head and it's not, the FDA is there really to protect people also from a manufacturing perspective.
Okay.
And so it's the claims, yeah, but it's also the
You're
manufacturing.
putting a probe next to your
Yeah,
head
you
to
want it
make
to
sure it
be,
works.
trust me, you want it to be regulated by the FDA.
Right,
Now,
right.
are there some loopholes? They're getting closed.
Yeah.
The FDA is not open to a brain stimulation device now that's only being marketed, say, for cognitive performance. They're not going to let you uh, bring that to market without going through this highly regulated process. Yes, there's some stuff out there. It's probably because they're not, if they're still doing it, the FDA just hasn't gone around to them yet. Maybe it's
Okay.
not big enough, but um, it's very clear in the regulation. If you're doing anything, putting electricity on your head to stimulate the brain, FDA wants to regulate that. Um, and they want a prescription.
Right.
So
Okay.
I think again, in a few years, we can have a conversation with them about an OTC application. But for the first few years, it'll be
Yeah.
by prescription. Yeah.
In the studies you've done, what are you hearing? Somebody tries it
Yeah.
and they're seeing the benefits of it. Is it, I guess there's two questions. One is, what's the vision? Can this permanently take care of anxiety? Is it a use it when it's happening? Is it, I'm noticing a general reduction
Yeah.
over, what are some of the things you've seen so far
Yeah.
in the studies?
Yeah. Well, studies, and we have over 60,000 patients who are using it today.
Oh, really? Okay.
And
And this was because that first phase that
yes,
you were
the
allowed
first
to,
phase, again, we
that's
was a
huge. Yeah.
negotiation with
It means
FDA.
people in their home, they're self-doing it
Yeah.
based on the protocol. And
Our version 1 device, there are over 60,000 people using it, and some of them, most of them at this point, for more than 5 years.
wow.
Um,
And what are they saying?
so what happens off the bat, if, I'd say about 80% of the people who use the device do have a pretty rapid response to it.
Which
And
means, just so I'm clear,
symptoms go
the,
away. Yeah.
they're not just using it when they feel it; they're on some sort of regimen.
You're on the regimen. So you start as a daily practice.
Yeah.
For the first week, you want to really do it twice a day, morning, evening. After the first week, once a day. And then you can go down. We have lots of patients using version 1 that now use it a few times a week.
Wow.
Other people, they use it, it's a ritual. When you build a ritual and you like the ritual, you keep it.
Yeah,
And,
it's
and
a
so
moment
a lot
for
of,
'em,
yeah, a lot of
yeah.
people, do they have to use it every day? Maybe not, but a lot of people still use it every day. And so I think, they're reporting not just that they're in remission, but that, they've noticed improved memory, focus, concentration. We're actually starting to track that in studies now.
Interesting.
And so, that the reason why you want to do it twice a day in the first week is you want to create, new and better connections between brain regions. And then that's getting reinforced electrically, twice a day, even 3 times a day in that first week. And then you're kind of, you're maintaining all those new connections that you've created in the first week.
Right.
So depression, in one sense, you can think of it as electrically you're in a rut, right? Your thoughts are going through literally the same channels over and over, and the device can help create new channels for communication between the regions. And then once you establish those, you want to continue to maintain those channels.
Yeah.
and grow new ones, more incrementally over time. So that's that's not just the concept. That's what research is showing, not just with our device, but with the in-clinic form, the TMS. Uh, Really, the way people like to do TMS now is concentrating it like 6 hours a day in the first week,
Yeah, okay.
really, and then you can get maintenance after that. Um, so yeah, I think it's morning and evening, then once a day, and you can go down less than that afterwards. And it's just like if you were to use it, you might find that you want to use it twice a day, continuously, because you already have a practice where it fits in, the
Right, right.
meditation practice where it fits in.
Let me ask you two questions come to mind. One is psychology, and the other one is microdosing, which I don't know.
Yeah.
I want something feels like there's a connection.
Yep.
But on the psychology end of it, when I think there's something in my life that's causing me agitation, right?
Yep.
But let's say it
Yeah.
gets to where it really causes me anxiety.
Sure.
I think, okay, I have to figure out what it is, and whatever it is, come to terms with it, let it go, whatever
Yep.
the process
Yep.
is.
Yep.
Um, and so that's got to be an effect on the brain, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
As you
Yeah.
work through it. Could this possibly be a replacement for that? Is it the same sort of new neural pathways and connections that are being made as the kind of work where I may more traditionally analyze something?
I would say it's not meant to be completely
Yeah.
replacement, but it is doing in that what you're taking advantage of plasticity and therapy to
Right.
create new, literally new electrical patterns in your brain. Um, I- Ideally, you're using a device like ours with that
With
at the
the
same
okay.
time,
But the
but it
science
could
is sort of the same in that
in
it's
and on a high level.
yes,
Yes, it's
yes.
neuroplasticity,
Correct.
and that's with psychedelics. There's a lot of
Right.
focus on that as well. Yeah, I think.
And that's what this is also neuroplastic. It's in that
Yes,
realm.
you could put all of these things essentially into a neuroplasticity
Got it.
bucket.
Interesting.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
That's
It's
great.
just very
Yeah.
different approaches and varying degrees of how quickly you can establish those connections. Like psychotherapy can take 8 weeks to have an effect.
Yeah.
In the depression study we did last year with 185 women, uh, most of the impact was in the first 7 days, and then they got progressively better
Really?
to
Wow.
in 4 weeks. We had 74% response rate in 4 weeks.
And again, I don't want this to
Yep.
be a silly question, but the
Yep.
level of depression, these are clinically, people have been diagnosed clinically depressed
Yes, the
in this
study
group that
was
you're studying.
severe and moderate.
Wow.
Most studies, by the way, intentionally recruit severe
The most
because you
extreme.
have the most amount of back down to zero, right? You have a bigger delta that you can show a change with a
Right.
drug or device. So it's if you have mild depression and you're in a clinical trial, you don't have very far to go for the company to show that there's an effect, right? So you want to you tend to want to recruit severely in all kinds of studies, patients with severe symptoms, so that you have enough room to show an effect versus a placebo.
That's interesting.
Yep.
When uh, uh, the breakthrough first happened with the original owners, was that and
Of
you
the
spoke about
inventors, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
inventor,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah,
and you had the breakthrough with the square wave
yeah,
and the frequency.
yeah,
Um, what was the original breakthrough with the inventors
yeah.
that sort of opened the whole?
Great question. So I'd say the inventors really had a breakthrough in the waveform, the frequencies. We didn't talk about the pulse rate, but the pulses of the stimulation, that on-off period. It's on for a little bit, then off for a little bit. And even within the on periods of our simulation, there's micro on and off at the microsecond level. So there's a millisecond level of on off, and then within the on, there's a microsecond level of on off. So when you wear a device for 20 minutes, you're getting like around 8 minutes of simulation, even though you're wearing it for 20 minutes
Hmm.
because of all that on and off
Hmm.
period. Um, and that is designed to leverage what's called temporal summation, which is the kind of stepping up of the neuron to a state where it fires. We have an action potential. So they've worked on that and developed that. The original product that we were able to market for a little while under FDA was variable output. So it would go from 0 all the way to 4 milliamps. The doctor or patient using it could adjust it at any level in between there. You could even flip a switch and it would go from alternating current to direct current, which means on alternating current, the polarity goes back and forth, positive, negative on each electrode. With direct current, it's just fixed. You could turn off pulsing. So it was like a lab device that they built. And then, but we were able to market that.
Yeah.
We gave instructions on how to use it. And then the FDA, you can think of it as eventually they're like, look, you have to have like a fixed dose. You have to validate a fixed dose.
Okay.
And so what we did is through all of this research we did and all of the anecdotal, we figured out like that combination of what's therapeutic and comfortable to wear and can be blinded, in a study where you could actually, people can't tell if they're wearing a sham device or active device. And so we picked this one dose that did all of those things. We validated it. And that's what our technology that we're bringing into the FDA now or in the next few months is.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing. I was just thinking about the rise in anxiety in children, right? I mean, that must be on the map of, how I don't know what the age, when's too young, but let's take a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 16-year-old.
Yeah.
There must be applications in that. I mean, it's such a it's an epidemic right now
I,
with anxiety in kids.
I have I won't share her name, but I have a young member of the family
Yeah.
who, like many of her peers, is challenged with that. And
Yeah.
so I think about it very personally every
Right.
day. And I think, it's, especially with girls, they're more socially sophisticated than boys at
Yeah.
that, age 10. And then you have puberty. So then you have all of the hormones on top of that kind of very sophisticated social structure, and way of interaction. So I think girls have the hardest time
Yeah, I agree. I
going
have a
through this.
14-year-old daughter. I
Okay. So
agree, and I have
yeah,
compassion for her. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know how you do it.
I,
It's brutal.
so I mean, we have to do, a pediatric study.
Yeah.
Uh,
That must be a
so
whole other.
I can't wait to do
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
I've been talking to a children's hospital about co-sponsoring a study. They're interested in depression. Fingers crossed we get
That would
that
be great.
done.
That'd
Yeah,
be great.
yeah. I would be. It's so needed, and I think, you know, pregnant women is another market where
Interesting.
the FDA, you can't market to pregnant women unless you have a study with pregnant women. So that's usually not something, like even with the antidepressant drugs, there aren't a lot of studies. And so the doctors will just make a risk benefit and saying, okay, you know, we don't want someone committing suicide, so we're going to give you the
Yeah.
medication. But of course, as a mother, you're concerned about what is that doing.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge underserved market as well. Is like, my wife used it during pregnancy, was using it in when she was in the hospital, with labor and all. So it can be hugely helpful.
Wow.
So
That's
uh,
really exciting
yeah,
to think
I'm
about.
excited
That's
to.
really exciting to
Yeah,
think about. So other visions, we have that where, pie in the sky.
yeah.
Where do you think it leads? What kind of doors does it begin to open up?
I think, ultimately, of course, I see of rose-colored glasses, but
Yeah.
I see this as whether it's my device or not, it should be as ubiquitous as a smartphone. Everyone should be using this. As I was saying, in it, maybe 5 years time, I
Yeah.
think, when we have the prevention data and we have, I mean, when we've shown, for instance, if we track true groups in a study, uh, who have maybe some pre-dementia symptoms or people who don't have any, and see who gets them faster. And if we can start showing that we're improving brain performance as you get older too. You have the young, you have older.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's the scale of this. I think we want to be, as a company, the quote unquote iPhone of this
Interesting.
category,
Yeah.
and build a digital ecosystem around it where you may still get the cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah.
You may get personal training. I use an app for personal training, where they come right to my office and it's low cost. It's like under $100. All kinds of services that I think people will start to, whether you're in a really tough place and you use the device to get into a place where then you can start thinking about
Yeah.
exercise, right?
Right.
Or if you're already, maybe you're not really that depressed, but you could use some, you want to optimize your performance. So I think that there'll be there's already those use cases, but I think those will become, things that we can explicitly talk about, that we can, have communities around. And I think, we're starting with anxiety and
Yeah.
depression, but it's a
The high level stuff
much bigger
that needs to
world.
be
So
dealt with, right?
yeah, yeah. And I think like having some, professional athletes using it and talking about their experiences will help build awareness
Sure.
from that perspective. So, but again, yeah, I think everyone should be using it.
That's a
Uh,
great, that's a good vision. I wonder, I mean, it's hard to imagine there's certain things that seem like a win-win, but you're dealing with the brain, you're dealing with the body and all this pushback. I mean, do you get pushback? Do you have to deal with, are there groups of people who don't want this to happen? How does that, or do you know? I mean, it's people like, this sounds like a great idea, go for it.
well, yeah, so I often get asked, are the drug companies, would they want to crush this? And the train has already left the station, I think, in the sense that the antidepressants and the heyday of those blockbuster drugs is kind of over. They're mostly out of patent. They're mostly,
Okay.
so the big pharma don't have the vested interest in that any as much as they used to. So I'm not afraid of that moving forward. I think there are interests in the in-clinic brain stimulation business model that feel a little bit threatened by this. I always say, I'm not trying to replace anything. I want to be a combination with basically everything.
Right, right,
Um, but from an insurance perspective, if you could pay $1,500 for our device or $8,000 for a series of
right.
brain stimulation treatments, what are you going to
Yeah.
choose, right? So,
And your device is ongoing.
uh,
I mean, you can use it
yeah,
forever.
and you get to keep
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So I think that's the only place I have experienced some pushback,
Right, right.
but not from really doctors. It's
Yeah,
more just pure business competition,
right, sure.
which we can overcome. So I think doctors, they want another tool in the toolkit. They love that it's low risk. I think the FDA needs to be, I think they look at this as they want to hold us to a high standard because, you can use this remotely. In clinic brain stimulation, well, at least there's a doctor there the whole time,
Mhm.
right? So I get that they want class 3 for the highest level for depression because, this can be telemedicine, you get it, then that's it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it better work.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so we're doing a pivotal study with Mass General for depression. That's our next step. But we've already done the anxiety study. We did it with Seattle Police Department and a bunch of other police departments, fire departments. So
So once you get
yeah,
approval, so how long until you think you'll get this approval?
I'm fingers crossed we'll have the anxiety by the end of the year.
And that means what? Once you get
We
that,
can market and distribute it for anxiety, for the treatment of anxiety.
which means but I need a
Yep.
prescription from a doctor on it who says, hey, use this
Could
device.
be telemedicine, but
Got it.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Got it.
yeah,
Right. Interesting. Well,
yeah,
that's great.
yeah, yeah.
That's a big move.
Should be easy to, yeah, that's next. And then I'd say a year or so after that, we'll get hopefully approval for depression, that highest level. Yep.
But if somebody gets a prescription, they use it for anxiety,
Yeah,
based on what you're saying, because it's one protocol,
yeah,
it'll help with everything, but I can't
yes,
specifically say,
yeah. Right. I can't market it
yes,
until I get
but you're going
that
to get all those
extra.
benefits.
Yes, and I
Okay.
think the insurance companies will also see that,
Yeah.
and they will like that,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, and I think again, this is, if there's anything you have to say about our tech, the whole category, is that it's safe at this level of electricity is very, very low. Um, you're not. We've been on the version 1 has been out there for 10 years. We can't get it anymore, but now we're in this new process. But
Yeah.
there's nothing that's come out of the woodwork. There's, there would have been
Yeah.
evidence by now if
That's great.
there was a terrible pattern of something. So I also make clear it's not like there's never side effects, like
Right.
headache, dizziness can happen, but there's not, the
Yeah,
kinds
but
of
if you look
things.
at the side effects on the
100%. Yeah,
commercial,
yeah, yeah, yeah. 100%.
like every time
Yeah,
those come out, that kids, I laughed. I'm like, why? I mean, that's insane. But I get
yeah,
it. If somebody needs it, this is the
yeah,
trade-off.
yeah, yeah,
Fortunately, that's the trade-off.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
this is a situation with less
100%.
trade-off, which would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, what I love about, first of all, I appreciate your time. It's been amazing to
Likewise,
learn about this.
likewise. Thank you.
What I love about sort of personally is, like me, it seems like a very untraditional approach into a field where, you weren't from, you know, but because of the entrepreneurial side, because of the creative and artistic side, and just your openness to learn stuff.
Yeah.
You're in this whole new brave world, and there's some areas in the business now where I find myself going into fields that are related, but I don't know much about. But I resonate with that because I feel like in
Yeah.
that way we're the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and also the excitement of learning about a whole new field, but also it stems from the fact that you tried it, it was personal,
Yeah.
you could speak to it.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
I see it. I mean, my parents, my dad struggled with mental health.
Yeah.
Family members, who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard not to take it personally.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Awesome.
That's amazing. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
best
you.
of luck.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.